Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Overwatch League Fan Thoughts and Analysis. Today I'm taking a look at the Hangzhou Spark roster. Just a little thing I want to mention though. Going forward, not starting with this video, starting with the next video, I know it's a little late, I'm going to start trying to watch a little bit of film or a little bit of some VODs or whatever from some of these teams, some of these players, what they're all playing. I haven't gotten the chance to do that this time around, but I want to start doing that a little bit more going forward. I know it's a little late, but that's just something I want to do, just so I can have at least a little bit of a better idea as to what the team's players actually have done. So that is all I want to say about that. And also just want to say that any sources that I use, any websites that I use, whatever, I always link it in the description. That is what I do every time. I don't use anything that I don't link in the description. Just want to make that stuff very clear, because I had some people saying, oh, you must have just did this. No. Anything I link down below is what I use, and that's it. But let's jump into this, and let's talk about the first thing with this team, which is the DPS play. Now, they have 4 DPS players. Most of them are South Korean, but they do have one Chinese player who we'll get to here at the end. We're going to start with Adora. Adora comes from 7, which he played with in Contender Season 2 of Korea. Before that, he was with Foxes for a while, and before that he was with Nucor and Nucor Wolves. He's this roster, he's definitely the best Hanzo on this roster, and he's a very good Hanzo. He's a good tracer as well, and can play some Genji. But he is one of the more, he is a pretty flexible DPS player, but Hanzo is his main hero, and he's good with tracer as well. So that's what you're going to see out of him, which is interesting, because Hanzo is a pretty dominant hero at times in the meta. He was very dominant at the end of Season 1. I don't know how dominant he is right now. Obviously, we're living in a meta that is triple tank, triple support, so it's not as big now, but it is still something I would say is very, very prominent on the meta, or in the meta. So I'd say look out for Adora to be playing a lot of Hanzo, and playing whatever if he needs to, but that's what I look at the most. Next, we have Bazi, who also comes from 7, played with 7 for a while, and before that played a little bit. I think actually he was only on 7 ever. Yeah, he only played for 7, but he was on 7 when they had an old an old logo. That's why I was confused. But Bazi is going to mostly be this team's Widowmaker, but his McCree is also good, his Tracer is also good. But he can play some other heroes, but I don't expect him to because of how many DPS players are on this roster. And also not expecting to is Hexagrams. He has a nice little article on the Overwatch League where he goes over a lot of these players. So I agree with him. I don't expect him to flex just because of how many there are. And you don't really need to flex over to other heroes if there's other people to do it. So he's mostly going to just play Widowmaker, I would assume, but I'm sure he'll do other stuff as well. But I think that's going to be his biggest role, is just to play the Widowmaker. So that's Bazi. Next we have Gods B. He comes from X6 Gaming. A lot of this roster is made up of players from both 7 and X6 Gaming. So there's a lot of players that have some history together, and I'll go over later kind of who comes from different teams, just so we are clear. But he is also a hit scan player, but he also has a little bit of a better Genji. But he can play most things from what I've seen. He's not super, like, you can't really call him a hit scan hero or a hit scan player. or just a projectile player. He has a much more diverse hero pool, and can play pretty much anything from what I've seen of him, which isn't a lot, but I've seen some stuff from him. But some oh, some of his best stuff is as hit scan players. So that's what I would kind of expect to see him play the most. But I think he can play anything. So that's what I'll say about him. The next DPS player is Crystal. Crystal comes from T1W Esports Club, which is a team out of China. Crystal is one of the players on this roster from China. There are two of them. He is the first one that we're going to talk about here. Crystal is a pretty diverse player. He was on the Chinese World Cup team. He's got a much more interesting hero pool in my opinion, because he's, of course, Genji's his main hero, or Genji's his big hero. But he can play some hit scan. He can play McCree. He can play Widowmaker, of course. He's got that Tracer, as do most DPS players. Hexagrams mentions that he's probably their best Doomfist. So that is, I guess, what we would see. And I didn't know this, that the Chinese Overwatch scene adopted the Doomfist meta before any other region. Like, they were the earliest ones to adopt it. So he's been playing the Doomfist for a while. Since 2017, the Doomfist play. So he is very likely to be one of your better Doomfist players if Doomfist is big. So it's very interesting to see. But Crystal was on Team China. I saw him play a little bit, and I thought he was a pretty good player. I thought he was impressive. I didn't watch a lot of Team China. I was obviously, they didn't perform very well in the grand finals or the finals when they lost to South Korea. Didn't even take a single game against South Korea. They got 4-0'd, but they performed well against Finland. They performed well against Canada, and that's really what I think they needed to do. They needed to show that the Chinese Overwatch scene was still strong, and they did that by performing well when they did. So that's what I'll say. I think he's a very good player to have, and I'm glad that some of these Chinese players are getting a chance to play on a roster where they are actually going to be good players. Shanghai was a pretty rough team last year, so better position now. Next, we have the tank players, and the first one is Gushui. Gushui comes from LGD Gaming in Korea. In China. LGD got the second overall spot in Contenders 2018 Season 2 in China. Gushui was also on the Chinese World Cup team, and he was one of the best main tank players during the World Cup. He was incredible. He was a very good player. He's known for that Reinhardt, known for that Winston. He's aggressive. He's not as passive as some main tank players are. But yeah, his Winston is very good, and he was incredible in the World Cup. I mean, I watched him and I was like, all right, Gushui, you are impressive. So I'm excited to see what Gushui does in the Overwatch League. I think he will be playing a lot, but I don't know if he will be the starter, because this team also has No Smite, who comes from X6, which there are 4 people from this roster that were on X6. So he's not as aggressive, but he has that synergy with a lot of these other players on this team, and he has that history with all these other players on the team. And he's probably better as Reinhardt. Sorry if you can hear all the people walking upstairs. He's probably the better Reinhardt, but probably not the better Winston. And Reinhardt right now is the bigger hero. So it's going to be interesting to see which one of these two plays more. I think Gushui's better, but I think as a team, it might be better to have the player who has better synergy and plays the bigger hero in the meta right now. So I think No Smite and Gusho will both get a lot of playtime, but I think No Smite will probably be the main player in that main tank role for at least the early season. But as the season goes on, we might see some Gushui. But it'll be interesting to see how the two of them work together. Finally, we have Aria, the flex tank. Of course, known for playing that diva, as most flex tanks are. He comes from X6 Gaming as well, so that front line, if you have a front line with your diva and your Reinhardt, that's a pretty good front line. That's why I think Rhea and No Smite might play a little bit more at the early season, and then they might start to transition to Gushui as the season goes on. So yeah, I mean, I think he's gonna be a diva player for most of the season. If they need someone to play Zarya, it'll probably be a DPS player, as a lot of teams tend to do, especially when you only have one flex tank player. He will most likely be playing diva the entire season. And he's a solid diva player, so you don't really need him to play other heroes, which is funny because diva is such an interesting hero. She's in every team composition pretty much, but people don't think she's overpowered or broken or anything like that. So she's in a very interesting spot because she's really good, but she's not like too good, and everyone knows she's good, but everyone knows she's also not too good, or people are just like, she's not a problem, which is interesting. So I'm excited to see what Rhea does as this team's diva player. It's always interesting to me to see good diva play. I really like good diva play, so I'm hoping he gives us some good diva play. But that's their tanks. I really like their tanks. Their main tanks, their flex tanks are all really good. I think they have a solid team composition and a solid roster of tanks and DPS player. I think this team is very, very good right now. Obviously, I haven't talked about the supports yet, but just from what I've seen so far, and then we'll talk about the supports, which I also like the supports. But I like this team a lot. I think this team is solid. But we have the supports now, so we're gonna start with IDK, who comes from Lucky Future Zenith, which is a Chinese contenders team, the team that won both Season 1 and Season 2 of Contenders China in 2018. IDK is a very good Lucio player, which is of course interesting, since that is a big hero in the meta right now, with the GOATS composition, that triple tank, triple support composition. Hexagram says that it's rumored that multiple teams offered him a contract, which is interesting. But obviously he signed with the Hangzhou Spark. Now I think it's interesting that he is a good Lucio player, and that's his big hero, because who knows how long Lucio is going to be big in the meta. If this triple tank, triple support meta starts to die out, will Lucio still be big? Because right now Lucio is a focus, a central part of this composition, because you need that speed to get in there and just start taking out individual players one by one. And Lucio is the biggest part of that, because he is the one who just speed boosts them in there, does the damage, and then speed boosts them to the next part. So I'm curious to see if IDK is going to help lead this team to a big role, or going to play a big role on this team. I'm sure he will, because it seems like supports are big with shot calling, so he might be the shot caller for this team. But if Lucio stops becoming relevant in the meta, will he stop being the shot caller? Will he switch over to other heroes? Obviously, that's all kind of speculation and what-if scenarios, but the meta is always changing. Even when it stays very stationary for a while, eventually Blizzard is going to try to kill the current meta and change to a new one. And when that happens, we'll see. We'll see what happens when that happens. But I'm curious to see what IDK does with this team, but I'm excited to see him. Next, we have Revenge, who is your off healer, your flex healer. He also comes from Sevens. That's another player from that 7 roster. Revenge is Ana and Zenyatta, of course. And he's more of a I like to call it a more South Korean style of Zenyatta. I think more South Korean Zenyatta players are the more aggressive, um, do the damage type, because we see that with Jonak, we see that with Badoshin. Obviously, not every single South Korean Zenyatta is like that, and there's obviously some Western Zenyatas that are like that. But typically, from what I've seen, the Zenyatas that heal more are the Western ones, and the ones that do more damage are the ones from South Korea. So that's just something I have seen and I have noticed, and he is another person that supports that idea because he is a more aggressive, more get that damage in, get those kills, carry a team fight type of Zenyatta player. So I'm excited to see how he plays, because Zenyatta play was one of my favorite things from last season. Obviously, as a New York Excelsior fan, I liked watching Jonak play, but there's other ones, of course, that are good. And it's fun to see good Zenyatta play. So I'm excited to see how he performs going forward. But finally, we have BB, who is from X6 Gaming and is also a off-support player on a Zenyatta. They're both, of course, very similar. I think what's interesting is, of course, BB comes from X6, so there's some synergy there. But then Revenge also comes from 7, which means there's also some synergy there. Now, there's more synergy with the X6 group, but there is still synergy with that 7 group. So they're the two teams that are on this roster, the two teams that make up this roster. It's going to be interesting to see if they go with BB or they go with Revenge, because I think BB's the better Zenyatta, right? So, which I think means he will play more, and he is from X6, which has more representatives on this roster. So that's, if you throw in your 4 players from X6 Gaming, then you just have 2 from 7 or 2 from whatever. Then you have a roster that has history together, which is important. A roster with history is very, very important. But I don't really know which of these two is better. I didn't really look into it. I didn't really look at numbers or anything like that, in contenders. It's also hard to compare contenders China to contenders Korea because you're not playing the same teams, and you're not necessarily playing the same level of competition. But 7 finished in the bottom 10. They were in that 9-10 spot of Contenders 2018 Season 2 in Korea. I don't know why I said they weren't playing the same teams. They were playing the same teams. They're both from Contenders Korea. I don't know why I thought 7 was Contenders China. It's not. It's Contenders Korea. Whereas X6 got first in Contenders 2018 Season 1, and then were in the 5 through 8 spot. They were they made the playoffs in Season 2 for Korea. 7 didn't. 7 has every season in Contenders, they finished behind X6. So I think the X6 players are probably the slightly better players, and most of them will get more play time, at least to start. So that's why it wouldn't surprise me if we see No Smite and Adora playing. Maybe not Adora, actually. Adora's from 7, so he might not play. But I think definitely we'll see some No Smite and BB, because BB, of course, comes from X6, and No Smite comes from X6. IDK will, of course, play, because you have to have him play, because he is your main support player, so he's going to be playing. So in terms of the starting roster, the DPS roles where it gets a little bit interesting. I'm going to say, based on what I've seen, Godsby is the one most likely to play Brigitte, so I think he would start. The other one, probably gonna be Bazi. He plays that Widowmaker role, but it depends really what you need. because it might be Adora because he's got that Hanzo, um, or whoever whoever can play Zarya. I guess is the one who would more likely play. So that's kind of whatever. And then you have your yeah. That's it. So that's really where I'm looking at it right now. I think you definitely have a, a, a lot of talent on this roster. This video I know right now is kind of all over the place, and that's my bad. It's a little early, but I really think this team is very solid. I think they don't have a noticeable position where they're really lacking talent. I think they have everything they need to succeed on this roster, and I think that they will be one of the most dominant teams of the expansion teams this season. The Pacific is a very hard division, though. I think the Pacific, the gap between the highest in the Pacific and the lowest in the Pacific, I think is a lot smaller than the highest in the Atlantic and the lowest in the Atlantic, in the sense that I think that the teams are a lot closer in the Pacific. So the best team in the Pacific might have 3 to 4 less wins than the best or the second best team in the Atlantic, because the teams in the Atlantic aren't as good. London, Philadelphia, New York, when you look at Atlantic, are the standouts. And I think the 3 of them will probably compete pretty closely with each other. There might be an expansion team, or maybe Houston, or whatever. Will kind of start to look better and start to show up and compete for that top spot more. But when I look at the Pacific, I'm very impressed primarily with the really good expansion teams competing with your returning teams. So that's what I'm looking at the most. This team, the Hangzhou Spark, open up their season against the Shanghai Dragons, which I think will be a fantastic game. I think those two teams are both solid teams this season. Funny when you said about the Shanghai Dragons. And I think it'll be a great game. So get excited for that. We're still about 7 weeks away from the start of the Overwatch League. So it's going to be a little while, but I'm excited to see what we get from Season 1 or Season 2. Did I say Season 1 before? From Season 2. But that's everything I got for you. This video is now concluded. Let me know down below in the comments what you think about this roster. And then also consider liking and subscribing if you enjoy this type of content. But I'll see you all in the next video. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Have a happy new year. And I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.